Aspire leaders, I hope you're having a wonderful start to your summer. I'm about to jump on a plane to head out to Hot Springs, Arkansas with the wonderful Jeff Gargis and Chad Ostrowski, as we're going to be over at the Hot Springs Technology Institute Conference, HITSI, and we're going to be discussing a lot of different topics. So super excited about this event. This is something that has been an annual trip for us as a Teach Better crew. And super excited to not only speak about Aspire to Lead, but then also leadership capacity, which I'll also be doing a keynote on here next week with MELC. And then Jeff Gargis and myself are going to do a full day workshop working with these educators on MacBooks. So pumped to see everyone in person and love the Hot Springs area. Now, today we're going to be talking to Christine Zuppa, who is a co-founder of Making the Grade Project, an organization with a mission to empower educators starting with the very beginning of their career. And we're going to be diving into a lot of their work, but then also on some very not only interesting, but vital topics on neurodiversity in education, executive functioning for teachers and students, and diving into that difficult conversation on standardized testing and how we should be using it as a metric for our students. So join us as we're going to be talking to a marvelous educator, leader, and a podcaster with a phenomenal podcast called Making the Grade. Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead, where we will be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. All right, Aspire leaders and Teach Better family, I'm so excited for my guest today. I have the wonderful and talented Christine Zuppa, who's a part of the Teach Better podcast network with her co-host, and we're going to talk about that project and so much more of what they're doing to help educators throughout this country. But with that being said, Christine, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I love your podcast, Making the Grade, and then, of course, the work that you do within consulting. But before we get to those projects and some of the topics we're going to cover today, I'd love for you just to share with the audience in regards to your educational leadership background.
Yeah, of course. My background is in special education. I was in the K-12 setting for a little over a decade. And when 2020 hit, like many other educators, I kind of pivoted in the field. It was a planned pivot, though, because I was having my first baby and I knew I was going to take a year-long leave of maternity. However, I did not know that we were going to go through a global pandemic. So yeah, it was like a big pause for me, and an opportunity came my way to support educators in their educator prep programs. So I started doing that remotely, and I've been doing that ever since. And if you told me that 5 years ago, I would not have believed you, because I absolutely love everything education, what I was doing, and what I continue to do. So I started working with adult learners in 2020. I became an executive functioning coach, and I use those methods along with my special ed background and special ed lens in a lot of the work that I do now in helping train new teachers in the classroom. It's like the 30-second synopsis.
Yes. Love it. And we got connected through the Teach Better podcast network, and so happy that you all are joining us in that. We've got almost, I think, 50 podcasts now on the podcast network. We're growing like crazy. Love Making the Grade as far as the podcast. So make sure, for those who are listening, jump on over there, subscribe to that wonderful project. But I want to know, I'm kind of doing this backwards. Typically, I do the projects at the end. But Christine, I'm so excited about you joining the podcast network that I really want you just to share about why you all created this podcast and what is the target audience for this project.
Yes, of course. First, I want to start by giving a shout out to your podcast, because is this a full circle moment? So when we first started thinking about education in this lens of, reaching a broader network, connecting with people all over the country, hopefully all over the world, and having these conversations, we started doing a lot of research. We nerded out and looking into many different podcasts, and yours was one of the ones that came up. I've talked to you about this before. I remembered your logo. And so full circle moment right here. But we just wanted to have more organic conversations with teachers who, not necessarily the new teachers, not necessarily the veteran teachers, but kind of the in-between. One of our early podcast mentors called us like the Humpty Dumptys. We were kind of in the middle, could have gone either way. And we didn't want to isolate one specific audience. We wanted to have conversations with teachers who, have been in the classroom for a good amount of time, what is keeping them there, keeping them happy, keeping them motivated to do the amazing work they're doing. And then the teachers that have, left the classroom, might be within education still, what had caused them to leave. And then what, a full circle conversation of what are the things that education today needs to be the best for teachers and students. So that was kind of the intent. Again, we wanted it to be organic, fun. When you listen to our podcast, you're not going to get, a research article or anything like that. It's we play games. We want to know like your craziest student story, and then we want to just hear your story and elevating teachers' stories all over the world. So that's
for sure. Yeah, no, you are executing that. And the one thing I love is just like the transparency in it. It's not like we're trying to hide anything. It's being honest about what's going on in the classroom. And I think more stories need to be heard because, especially for our young teachers, they don't exactly know what they're going to see their first day, their first week, their first year. And so, that content is beautiful. So shout out to you and what you've created. And thank you so much for the kind words. That's an honor. The podcast just hit 6 years. So
yes, congratulations. I saw that.
Yeah. So super excited about that. But with that being said, you all are doing a lot of consulting now and working and supporting so many districts in the United States. So I want to talk about some of the topics that you are extremely passionate about. One of them is neurodiversity in education. And I don't feel like I've really touched on this topic. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, but then also for you just to educate the listeners in regards to what does that even mean, Christine?
Yeah. So again, not necessarily a textbook definition, but what we consider neurodiversity in the classroom to look like is the idea that everyone has a unique brain and that each individual receives, processes, and learns information in a unique way. And the way that kind of affects classrooms and teachers and the way that we as teachers reach all of our students is thinking about that from their unique lens. So that's something that I think I've always been passionate about, probably just special ed background and thinking of accommodating all learners. But it's really exciting to see this become a broader topic in Massachusetts. We see this everywhere. It's part of some of the work that we're getting into in the upcoming school year, which is exciting. And it's a lens that we kind of view almost everything that we do in terms of, so we support teachers now through professional development series and helping them get ready for their teacher tests in Massachusetts. That's one of the big things we do. But before we start with any of that, we think about what is their unique lens to process information? How do they learn best? And then what are the ways that we can support them in that? Yeah, it's cool to see this conversation on a broader level. Sometimes neurodiversity involves individuals with a unique diagnosis. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes it just has to do with an ideal learning environment, accommodations they may need, and the way that they process information in the way that works best for them.
So I want to touch on that just a little bit further. So maybe we've got, an administrator or a lead teacher that is listening to this and saying, you know what, I think we need to make some changes on our campus, and specifically in the classroom, to make sure that we are, making it conducive for all learners. And for those, like you were saying, that have a variety of different ways that they learn and think, what are some strategies that you like to assist with or try to implement in the classroom when you're supporting teachers?
Mm-hmm. So we start with what we call a learner profile assessment, and it sounds much more complicated than it is. It's really just a few questions to get our audience thinking about them and how they identify. So we ask questions about ideal learning environment. Where do you even if we're in a traditional classroom setting, what preferential seating, sometimes even as specific as we've had students tell us they don't like overhead lights on environment. We kind of start there. And then we think about kind of from an executive functioning perspective, I think there's 12 total categories when we think about how we process information. But the biggest, most commonly talked about and used have to do with visual presentation of information, auditory, and kinesthetic. So we kind of stick to those. We ask if you identify as one of those, or usually a combination, because I think I'm definitely a visual and a kinesthetic learner. I like to move around, frequent breaks. I like to see things. If I hear something, if I'm not looking at it, I don't remember what you said. So thinking about that as well in terms of content. So we do a lot of like online self-paced stuff, and teachers, I think, are starting to do that. We've seen a little bit more with teachers initiating that in their classroom. It could be as simple as, like using Scribed or something for a lesson to just pair a few important pieces auditorily as well as visually. And there are a lot of like internet plugins and things that you can use to have information presented in that way. So then, so starting with environment, getting into presentation, and then more complex things like if you have a specific learning plan or something like that, we try not to allow our sessions to go longer than like a half hour without a break, always giving a schedule and, things, just all the pieces that give an outline of what is to come. So I think mostly environment, lesson presentation, and then information processing, kind of the areas that we typically start with.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
So Christine, I know you and Georgia do a phenomenal job working with folks and trying to create a pathway for them. And you said something that I want to expand on, which was the executive functioning piece, because that's something that I'm trying to learn more about, because I do find a lot of value in that. And there's a lot of connections with that, with future ready skills and how we're setting them up for success as an adult. So I'm curious on how you all touch on executive functioning specifically and how that ties into what you were just talking about.
Yeah. So executive functioning, it sounds, again, more expansive than it really is. Like the idea of what it is and how it affects the way that people learn. Really, it's the way that we organize and process information. So that has to do with, like time management, organization, long-term planning. Those are a few examples. But I had kind of like an aha moment when I started doing the training and started working with tutoring and small groups with adult learners. And I started to see that, at least in the areas of content that I was working with, most of the time that it wasn't necessarily a lack of content understanding as much as it was their approach was not working. So for example, when I was teaching an undergrad class, I think a year or 2 years ago, I had, Gen Z in front of me, and they were asking me for resources for what we were about to learn, a standardized test approach. And they said, Professor Zuppa, we have so many different books and things that other teachers have given us. And we've had Chromebooks since we were like 8 years old. So we don't really use, but like, I've never opened this and I'm not going to. Thank you for being honest. And that makes sense, right? Because you are used to learning in a certain way. If you keep giving students things that they might not necessarily use in their day-to-day, it has to work for them. So when we talk to our students, our teachers, about what are the ways that they've been successful in the past, if it's a long-term project, working backwards, what's going to actually get you to do that goal? So most of the time, again, it's not actually the work as much as it is the approach to get that task done. Is it going to be writing something down in a planner? Will you actually do it? Do you need a reminder on your phone? Do you need what system is going to work best for you to complete whatever the task is? And oftentimes, I don't know if it's, adult learners, sometimes they can be as candid as the kids that I've had, but they might even be a little hesitant to say like, I'm really overwhelmed, or that stresses me out. I don't even want to look at that book. I don't even want to look at that test. Like the idea of that is too stressful for me. So then it's like, okay, you need this information chunked, so it's kind of just a relationship building piece as much as it is them advocating for this doesn't work for me. And is there another way?
All right. You said testing. So I might hit a touch point for you. Right now, we're in the spring. It's almost the end of the school year. And I know all over the country, a lot of people are doing standardized tests. And I'm curious your thought on that in regards to it as a data metric.
Yeah. So hot topic in Massachusetts right now. So the state testing in Massachusetts is MCAS, and there is a huge push to get rid of MCAS as a graduation requirement. And I see the value in that. As a teacher who has worked in special ed and done the alternative assessments for my students, they will not receive a high school diploma because of that. So I think when, and then on the other hand, so that's one piece of it for our students. We were just at a conference, Georgia and I, this past, I think, February, and a lot of the schools that we work with in this area, a lot of the colleges are adding SATs back into their admissions process, as they're saying that it's not the full picture. However, it is an important data point. And I think that's kind of the way that we view standardized testing. It's not the full picture of a student. It cannot be the only metric that we are measuring a student profile. However, it is a piece of data that when we're using it in junction with all of the other pieces, what does their learning profile look like? In what ways have they been successful? What do their grades look like? What activities are they involved in? What value could this person or this individual bring to our school? So I think there is a place for it personally. However, I think that there should also be all the other pieces as a holistic view of it when it's used in admissions and when it's used as a metric of access.
Yeah, so it's more of just one piece of the puzzle, not the entire picture.
Yes, that's how we view it, which is funny because a lot of what we do is around standardized testing for teachers. And I think in doing that for so many years, we kept seeing the same teachers who were not passing, and those are the teachers that we need in front of the classroom. So our neurodiverse teachers and teachers who might speak English as a second language or might have no standardized test taking experience, those are the teachers that really need to be in front of our students. Again, it's a tricky subject, but we fall kind of somewhere in the middle. I don't agree that it should not be a metric. When I think about teaching students how to read, for example, there is a test that assesses your ability to do that as a teacher, and you need to know it in the way that it is laid out. There are alternative written assessments and things like that can measure in that way, but I do think there is a need for it. It's just the appropriate place for use of that data.
So your position is similar to your podcast, and you're the Humpty Dumpty of standardized testing.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So I don't think it should go away. However, I don't think it should be the full picture. If there's a teacher or a student on the line, I think there should be an alternative form, and there are. So in Massachusetts, at least.
Not just in Massachusetts.
I
was in Texas. I'm now in Colorado. I also was in school and got my degree in Minnesota. So I've gotten a lot of different states under my belt in regards to seeing firsthand as an educator. And it's always the same problem. It isn't the end all. There are so many kids out there that get extremely stressed out. Mm-hmm. They have anxiety during the testing, and it's not their best performance. And so to only have that, and similar to what you're talking about with the brain, I was actually shaking my head because I'm the same way. Like, I'm visual and I'm kinesthetic. Like, I got to move and I got to see. So a test isn't really fit my needs to show what I can do or the knowledge that I have in my brain. So I always loved when there was a project or something where I could show it in a different alternative way. And so to have it as a cookie cutter option for every child across the country is kind of silly in my mind anyways. So I might fall on the other side of that, Christine.
I was going to ask, do you think that there is a place for it at all? Or
Yes,
okay.
I do. I just hate that for so long it's been the be all and end all and defines our students as far as what they're able to do in the future. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with grades too. If you looked at my grades growing up, you would say I would be a high school dropout. I'd be terrible in life. And obviously that didn't occur. So mm-hmm. I think it's just a small piece, like you're saying, of a bigger picture. So yeah. I'm not disagreeing with you by any means, Christine.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting conversation. The more that we're in the space, so we're learning a lot more about it. A statistic that kind of swayed me a little recently, not swayed, but made me a little more open to the idea of it, was that specifically in Massachusetts, that the students who were in certain neighborhoods and certain schools, that was the only metric that was helpful for them. So if a student might be in a neighborhood where they're not going to outshine necessarily with grades, sometimes they tested better than their grades because of their home life. And I was like, I've never thought about it in that way. So the more that we learn about it, the more it's an evolving thought. But yeah, right now I think kind of just time and a place. We love talking about it though, because it stirs up some big emotions. Mm-hmm.
More information, the better, right? I mean, we're trying to get a full picture of the
definitely.
student and what they've mastered. So yeah, I love the idea of it being just a small piece in conjunction to other pieces of data to understand where the student's at and where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I want to transition. So obviously you have a new consulting business. You are working with educators, like I said, all over the country. So I'm curious on, what you and Georgia have created and how do you try to support educators and teachers within your new consulting business?
Yeah, so we are doing a lot of standardized testing in Massachusetts, a lot of work with around the teacher test. It's interesting because the responsibility of working with teachers to get them ready for their test doesn't necessarily fall on the district or necessarily their educator prep program. It's kind of in the middle. So we figured out a little bit of a sweet spot with supporting organizations in that. And the way that we support organizations has to do a lot with what we believe. So we have online self-paced content. So my background is because I'm a special education teacher, I have a million different ways to do the same thing. And it's kind of overwhelming to me. Like I know where everything is. However, when Georgia joined the team, she has a content design background and a creative approach and thinks about user experience in a way that I don't. So I have all the accommodations, modifications, different levels, different ways to learn, and she brings it to life. So we do online self-paced content for any area that we are building out. We do a lot of work around executive functioning for teachers, especially new teachers. We're working on a series that we're really excited about for the upcoming school year with an organization that works specifically with assistant teachers and all around topics that are meaningful to them. So organizing in the classroom, what AI could look like as a helpful tool, time management outside, work-life balance, just a lot of stuff that really lights us up to talk and think about and get their feedback on. And then with the online self-paced, because we know that that's an important piece, there's also a really important piece of connecting in live time and reviewing that and having small group discussions, breakout rooms, and things like that to check for understanding and different ways to assess. So that's kind of the way that we work with organizations. And we try to do things in those short condensed time blocks with more frequency and then designated deadlines. So if, we're looking to test in July, we're going to work backwards, make sure it's in a very streamlined process of like a 6-week approach. You're going to be ready to test or we're going to assess and see how you're doing in terms of applying these skills to your job. So we try to keep things within a certain time frame, I guess, in a certain way for assessing, knowing that some participants may fall outside of that and might need a little more help, might be done sooner. So far, it's working well. We're learning every day as we go. And I'm sure you've kind of found this in your podcast, like how many times do you pivot, So we start doing one thing or we think we have an idea and then it's like, oh, actually the customer wants it this way. Okay, sure. We can do that. So it's fun. And I think being open to the idea that it could be better than we anticipated has been something that we just keep seeing at every turn. Like, oh, we set out to do this standardized testing series, and now we're doing professional development with this really awesome organization on topics that light us up. So being open to the pivot has been helpful too.
Well, that's just great advice in life in general. But yeah, for those who are listening, definitely keep an open mind because you just never know where things will take you. And I'm so excited about everything that you're doing. For those who are watching on YouTube, you've probably seen me throw up the website constantly because definitely want you to head over to makingthegradeproject.com and you can see, all the phenomenal work Christine and George is doing. And then also if something has lit you up inside and saying, I want more information, I need, them to come out to assist, definitely go and check out everything that they have there. Also, there's resources, the podcast. I mean, there's so much content on there for folks. So Christine will also talk about how people can connect with you all on social media. But before I do that, I want to ask a question. This is kind of a staple for the podcast in regards to leadership. We create the podcast for aspiring and current leaders. So for those who are listening, if they're to do something tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you advise them to do?
I think going in line with the idea that I was just speaking about, that always have a vision, plan, and then be open to the pivot, I guess, be open to feedback along the way, figure out what of your vision is most important to you and be open to changing it as you get feedback along the way. I think that's been kind of one of our biggest takeaways in doing a podcast and doing consulting. We got some really good advice from Teach Better. We did one of the office hour calls with Jeff, and he was listening to our problem, and just his lens was so helpful of, well, it sounds like you're getting traction with this audience. What about this? We're like, never thought about it that way. So yeah, just being open as you go. Have your vision, be open to pivoting and learning as you go.
Well, totally, right? We preach that all the time as educators to our students, and then when it's our time as adults to do that, sometimes we get fixated, or it's like it's in cement. No, I can't change anything. It's like, no, this should be an ever-growing situation. So love that. Our leaders need to be lifelong learners and definitely learn to pivot when needing to do so. And honestly, if you're in any type of administration or leadership, like that's going to happen. If you're not willing to move or shift to what the needs are of your campus, you're going to have a very difficult time. With that, I would love for people to connect not only with you, Christine, but with your podcast mate, Georgia. So how can they connect with you all?
I would say we're most active on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Shoot us a message. We love hearing from other podcasters, teachers, consultants, people all over. We've had some really great connections through social media. So on Instagram, we are Making the Grade Pod for our podcast and Making the Grade Project for the professional development work that we do with teachers. And yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn as well, our website, of course. Yeah. But yeah, always happy to chat. Yeah, thanks. Always happy to chat. We love just open discussions. We've met so many cool guests that way and have connected with really cool people across the world. So we hope to continue.
For sure. Of course, everything will be on my website. So you can go over to joshtamper.com. It'll be links for everything in regards to LinkedIn, Instagram, the various websites, how to get to the podcast. Like I said, as soon as you're finished with this episode, make sure that you're connecting, subscribing. And then for those who are on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us here in this space. And then, I would absolutely love for you to push those like and subscribe buttons on the various platforms. So with that, Christine, I am so honored and privileged to have you a part of the Teach Better Podcast Network. I love Making the Grade as far as the podcast, the project, and all the phenomenal work that you all are doing. Thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Thank you so much for having us. We've been watching you for a long time. So absolute full circle moment today. Appreciate it so much. Thank you.